as a mere WhatsApp disagreement, and it has evolved to become the debate of the century, maybe even the debate of the millennium, as far as Wallington is concerned. This is our great Brexit debate between Mr. Jones and Mr. Flook.
Quickly, before I hand over to Mr. Dicker, who will be adjudicating the whole thing, I just want to take a quick straw poll. Before we start, could you raise your hands if you believe that the UK is better within the European Union? Please raise your hands. Alright guys, so now there's a fair few people who thinks that we should leave the European Union. If the debate changes your oppression,
what do we do in economics?
After, but without further ado, I want to hand over to Mr. Dicker, who will be adjudicating.
I start by saying, despite rumours in the country, I'll be just as fair and balanced as Fox News, so it's going to be completely impartial. The format of today's debate is there will be opening statements, there will be a coin toss to determine who goes first, there will then be questions from the floor, finishing with closing statements. So can I please start by first, and by no means least, Mr. Flook. Our teacher of English, classics, government and politics, the world, Mr. Jones.
Sit down on me. I want people sitting on the floor. There's a camera, is he he's filming it? On your phone.
I'm sure we'll come on to issues whether with the current deal on the table we should leave, we should remain, we should hard Brexit, we should have a second referendum, all that will come. I just want to start out by looking at kind of 4 or 5 key areas and thinking about whether Brexit in principle, in whatever format, is a good idea and what good idea we first kind of need to do. So the things I was talking about, the economy, I was talking about immigration, I'll talk about sovereignty, I'll now talk about security. Now Bill Clinton famously said it's all about the economy, stupid, so that is what I will begin with. David Davis, the Brexit minister, released the government's own analysis of the impact of Brexit when he was eventually forced to do so. They looked at GDP over 15 years. This is the government's own forecast, the government who are responsible for delivering Brexit and are the political party who are most committed to it. Their own survey suggests that GDP will be down by 2, 5 or 8 points depending on the sort of Brexit that we have. By 2 points if we leave with a kind of Norway-style deal, 5 points if we leave with a kind of Canada Plus style deal, or 8 points if we leave with a no-deal Brexit on World Trade Organisation terms. They estimate that over 15 years that will leave us with a £75 billion shortfall in the economy. Within the areas worst hit will be the West Midlands and the North West, which ironically enough are the 2 areas which I overwhelmingly voted to leave. Free trade agreements with, for example, the US mitigates that loss in terms of GDP by about 0.2%. If we're looking at unilateral trade liberalisation, so that would be one of the government's responses to no-deal Brexit, then they forecast, and remember these are their own forecasts, that would actually provide a boost to GDP of, again, 0.2%. A survey by Oliver Wyman suggests that the World Trade Organisation option would cost us £27 billion annually, and the Bank of England, now that's the Treasury is going to forecast. Now, if you look at the Bank of England's forecasts, on a no deal, we would potentially see a 4% rise in interest rates, and we'd see 30% knocked off house prices. They estimate that each family would be approximately £4,000 a year worse off as a result. Now I just want to pause and think about the implications of that, because this debate strikes me as, on the one hand, we've kind of got this magical Brexiteer wonderland of unicorns and fairies and the never nor, okay, promising us this amazing bright future. On the other side of the debate, the kind of side that I suppose I'm kind of putting forward has been characterised as kind of project fear, okay, that we're paralysed, we're committed to the status quo because we're scared of what will come. And I'm here to say that I am really, really scared of what will come. I thought about what that would mean for me and my family. 30% off my house price, 4% interest rates. I would not afford to live in London. I would leave, and I would have to leave, and I imagine a significant number of public sector workers would find themselves in the same boat. Classic Tory party is absolutely fine for the very, very privileged few, but anyone below that kind of top tier of society will be, for want of a better word, hung out to dry. Let's move a little bit further down the kind of socio-economic ladder. Let's think about what £4,000 a year annually would mean in real terms for the hard-working families which Theresa May loves to talk about. I reckon it's about £400 a month. I reckon £400 a month in terms of your mortgage payments, in terms of your bills, in terms of your food. I think that would have a significant, long-lasting detrimental impact on the ability of people to make their mortgage repayments, on the ability to feed their families. And the government and the Bank of England's own projections suggest that that would last up to 15 years. So that's 15 years of your future, my family's future, and the Conservative Party and those who favour Brexit are prepared to gamble away. I have to ask for what discernible gain. It's not going to make a difference in the Tory heartlands. It's not going to make a difference to stockbrokers living in Surrey, but for the people in the West Midlands, the people in the North West, for the most vulnerable people in our society, it is going to make a real devastating and detrimental impact. We're going to have 15 years of pain, and as yet, I cannot work out for what gain. In terms of immigration, which seemed to be kind of one of the, I suppose, most divisive issues in the Brexit campaign. I'm not going to kind of lazily characterise those who voted for Brexit as racist. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's significant pressure on services. I think there's significant pressure on infrastructure. One of my best mates is from Grantham, one of the areas that voted most overwhelmingly to leave the EU in the referendum. And people were worried that immigrants were coming in and they were essentially competing with them for places in hospitals and places in schools. And I understand that. I get that, that's a real concern for people. But personally, I don't feel that the issue there lies with immigration. I think the issue lies with the lack of infrastructure and a chronic lack of spending by successive governments who were there over a significant period of time. The argument is that, of course, by taking back control of our borders, we'll be able to limit that immigration and we'll be able to relieve some of the pressures on the admittedly stretched infrastructure at the moment. And the thing that kind of boggles my mind is that we already have those mechanisms in place. The 1994 Immigration Act, the ECJ ruling 26, gave us the provisions to deport people or ask them to leave the country after 3 months if they had not met a stringent set of criteria. Every single other European Union country makes use of this mechanism. We do not. And it's because our exit data is an absolute shambles. We do not know who's coming into the country and who is leaving the country. We include in our immigration figures, we all have become so agitated about 200 to 300,000 students who are not permanent migrants who are here to study. So first of all, the statistics themselves are extremely questionable, and secondly, we already have a mechanism to regulate immigration in the way that people say Brexit will enable us to do. So I think first of all, it's not a massive issue, it's not as big an issue as perhaps some people are suggesting, and secondly, we already have the facility to control that. Why do I say it's not a big issue? Well, if we look at net migration post the referendum, then from the EU it has fallen significantly. But net migration in total has stayed pretty much exactly the same. We've seen greater immigration from outside the EU. Why have we seen that migration? Because we need that amount of immigration to keep our economy moving. Overwhelmingly, the people who've come from outside EU countries into this country since the referendum result have come into skilled jobs in high-value sectors. We need that immigration. Without it, we cannot run the country. At the other end of the scale, something that was agitating an awful lot of people was the fact that they're coming over here and they're taking our jobs, i.e. we've got low-skilled migrant workforce coming in and taking jobs which should be available to our own indigenous low-skilled workers. Well, the last report from the Agricultural Union was that they expressed extreme fear about whether they will actually be able to harvest crops and that sort of stuff because of a projected lack of a seasonal workforce. Once again, we don't just need that high-end labour, which we're still getting, fortunately now, from outside the EU, we actually need it at the bottom end as well. Mr. Flook has previously suggested that, in essence, an immigration policy which prioritises one country or one area over another is, in a sense, kind of racist. It's an inherent bias towards one group of people, and I would utterly reject that as well. I think if Brexiteers come out and said the reason we object to not controlling our immigration is because we don't like the fact that we're prioritising one group of people over another, then legitimate. But they've never ever said that. Well, they've come out and they've said that we wish to reduce immigration, and that's not practical or, at the moment, desirable. The second thing that I think that people overlook is the fact that, with freedom of movement came freedom of trade. We're projecting trade agreements with all these other countries. Australia's one that's been regularly muted. These countries in return will want something similar to the freedom of movement, which is part of the deal that we have with the EU. Australia have already come out and said that that would be a condition of any free trade agreement with them. So, immigration is done. Sovereignty. Big stumbling block. People sort of taking back control, getting rid of European Court, human justice, all that sort of stuff. First of all, I want to say I think the WCGS is a magnificent institution. I find it very, very difficult to take issue with something which has given us maternity leave, workers' rights, minimum wages. I think these are unarguably a good thing. You could argue we could have come up with them ourselves. We didn't. The European Court of Justice did that. Secondly, Britain is the most successful country within the EU in terms of challenging and winning ECJ judgments. So in actual fact, compared to the rest of Europe, we actually had a really, really positive relationship with the ECJ. The third point is this idea of sovereignty. It seems to kind of ignore the idea that we live in a globalised world. The sovereignty that we will regain by leaving the EU, well, we're still kind of trading away that sovereignty by being a member of NATO, by signing up to World Trade Organization rules. Any form of trade partnership that we're in necessarily comes with a compromise on a country's sovereignty. We live in a globalised world, that is inescapable. Europe are our nearest neighbours, that is inescapable. What happens in Europe will have in the future, and has always had, a significant impact on the way that we live our lives in this country. At the moment, I would argue that our sovereignty is enhanced by being a member of the EU, because we are within that club, we can have a say. And we seem to be prepared to trade off this kind of airy-fairy notion of having more control is actually having a say. So I would argue that actually by giving up our membership in the EU, we'll actually have less sovereignty, not more. And the final, by no means least significant point, is to think about our security as a country. One of the kind of founding aims of the EU was, after World War II, the most devastating conflict which anyone has kind of been through, and which fortunately none of us have experienced. The EU was a project that was designed to bring harmony to Europe. And it's very easy to say now, there's not going to be another war in Europe. That is a significant part to do with the work that the EU has done, and will hopefully continue to do. And I think that we overlook that at our peril. We've got an increasingly aggressive Russia, who we increasingly rely on economic sanctions to keep in check. Our ability to unilaterally apply those sanctions will be significantly diminished without the clout of the EU. The US commitment to NATO rests largely on its special relationship with the UK, that we are a very strong advocate for US interests within Europe. It is doubtful, and it's been called into question by some defence experts, to what extent America would remain committed to the defence of a Europe where they no longer have a kind of proxy state through Britain's membership. The Galileo project, you've probably heard that we've invested kind of £30-odd billion, etc. in. It's absolutely pivotal for the future kind of success of our military organisations in terms of simple things like the way that our tanks fix onto and then fire at moving objects will all rely on the satellites, and the EU have already told us that we will not have access to that technology. We will have to develop our own. That leaves us militarily vulnerable. And the final thing is that with Brexit, there is absolutely no way of avoiding, in real terms, apart from this kind of nonsense, frictionless trade for which no one's actually invented the technology yet and for which the EU will never accept, there is absolutely no way to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. Now, once again, none of you guys will have lived through this. Mr. Flook certainly won't have lived through this. But the IRA bombing campaign on mainland Britain killed hundreds and hundreds of people. My uncle was very nearly blown up by the IRA. The number of people, innocent people, who died in Ireland was catastrophic. It is the single biggest conflict in our territorial area of our time. And what we're proposing to do as a result of leaving the EU is put back a hard border. To erect a hard border which will need to have British troops or British personnel on the ground, which divides the country. The Good Friday Agreement is probably one of the greatest political achievements of our lifetime. It's something that I think Tony Blair should take immense credit for. It took an incredible amount of hard work, effort and work to achieve it, and we're now prepared to throw that away and risk a return to sectarian violence with some sort of, well, as I say, I began this by saying in terms of the economy, I don't see what the reward for all this risk is. It's not just a risk we're taking with the economy, it's with people's lives and people's livelihoods.
Well,
I don't know where I can't see that.
that speech reminded me of something. And it reminded me of all these predictions that we've had over the last 100 years that have something in common. 1930s, we left the gold standard, and every economic expert said it'd be the worst thing we ever did. It's actually the best thing we ever did. Every single economic expert said that we shouldn't need the Bretton Woods system. Well, actually, it was the best thing we ever did. Every single economic expert said that we should join the European exchange rate mechanism. We pulled out, it was the best thing we ever did. Every economic expert in the world said we should join the euro. Thank God we're not in the euro. And then, these same people that you seem to portray as the arbiters of the working class interests, these Michelin-star climbocrats, if they've been wrong 5 previous occasions, why should they be correct on the 6th? If you have to take one word away from today, you should take the word obsolete. The European Union is completely obsolete in the 21st century global age. Yes, perhaps in the 1950s, when freight costs were high, when tariffs were high, regional trade blocks perhaps seemed the way forward. But we live in the age of the internet, of Skype, of Amazon, of all these big multinational retailers. Geography is the most irrelevant thing today as it ever has been. Only going to get more irrelevant. It's as easy to do business with a company in Pakistan as it is in Poland. In fact, it's probably easier to do business with a company in Pakistan because that Pakistani company will speak English, share common law, have similar contract law. So why are we tying ourselves to the world's only declining trade bloc? Remarkably, the Eurozone was the same size at the end of last year as it was in 2006. Yet in that time, Ethiopia's economy doubled in size, Brazil's economy doubled in size, India's economy doubled in size, China's economy doubled in size. So why are we in a situation whereby we cannot sign our own trade deals? And added to that, we fought a civil war in this country to establish the principle that taxes should be raised and laws should be set by the people that we elect in our own Westminster Parliament. Well, we've actually got a situation now where the European Commission, a group of unelected people, now have the supremacy of their law over the British Parliament. In fact, it's worse than that because the people in the Commission usually find their jobs by being expressly projected by their voters in elections in their countries previously, like Peter Mandelson and Neil Kinnock. We just heard about the cuts, about the pressure on infrastructure.
Well, in 2010-2015, the entire austerity programme that all those Labour MPs voted against, and that every single head teacher was up in arms about, equated to £39 billion. In that time, that same 5 years, our entire gross contributions to the European Union was £89 billion. Our net contributions were £45 billion. So even if you insist on taking the net figure, by making that one single eradication in our public spending, that would have been enough to cancel the entire austerity programme and enough money to take 1p off income tax. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, the 4th largest military power. We have 1 of 5 seats in the UN Security Council. Just how much bigger do we need to be with our people on the Remain side, except that we are big enough and bold enough to discover our global vocation that we once took for granted.
We're going to take some questions now. I'm going to limit 1 minute from
Both debaters, would you accept, or would you try and trigger a people's vote on the final deal that is presented to Parliament, or would you rather be left in the hands of the MPs and the laws of the bills?
First of all, I think the referendum itself was a bad idea. I think it was a dereliction of his duty by the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron. I think that we have representative democracy in this country for precisely that reason. We elect officials who are party to a significant amount more information and expertise than we are, and we elect them to make complex decisions on our behalf. The second that you start kind of handing over that responsibility to direct democracy, I think you open yourself up to the winds of populism, and I think that's exactly what we've done. Nonetheless, the fact that we've done it, I think is significant, and I'm sure me and Mr. Flook will probably agree that I think that a second referendum at this point will be incredibly divisive and incredibly patronising. And I personally wouldn't support a second referendum because I think that it would be incredibly damaging to the social fabric of this country. I think that means that, unfortunately, we will kind of default to a no deal and tumble out of the EU without a credible plan, and I think that's a great pity. I think whilst we shouldn't be in this situation in the first place, and I hope that the Conservative Party will be forever held responsible for that, and voters will remember it for, certainly for our lifetimes, and that will do a measurable good service to this country. Sadly, I don't think a second referendum is the way forward.
I agree entirely. I think actually we've had so many people's votes in this. We had the general election in 2015 where a majority of parties voted for those committed to a referendum. Then we had the referendum in 2016 where before that the majority of 500 in the House of Commons said we respect the result. Then we had the referendum where the biggest number of people ever in the history of our democracy voted to leave the European Union. Then we had the 2017 general election where 84% of parties voted for those. We've had about 3 people's votes from the people, and many votes in the House of Commons already, so no, I don't support the people's vote. I think we'd undo democracy.
Thank you.
About it not being reflected sovereignty, and that any erosion of sovereignty will be insignificant. Yet why do we see men like Guy Verhofstadt constantly parroting in the European Parliament that all the nations of Europe must give further sovereignty to the European Commission and further give more concessions to an unelected body which none of them have a say?
I'll begin by saying that I'm actually not the foggiest who Guy Verhofstadt is. I don't think the point I was making you was that I don't think that sovereignty is important. I think the point I was saying is that sovereignty is important to people, but a necessary fact of the modern world, and worlds which rely on globalised free trade deals, means that you inevitably have to trade a degree of your sovereignty to be a member of those trade organisations. And then I actually went on to argue that kind of conversely, I think that we have more sovereignty, more kind of control over our destiny and what happens to our country by being at the debating table and having a voice that's heard when those decisions are being made. What I fear when we leave the EU is that in actual fact a significant number of the decisions they continue to make, and don't get me wrong, I think the EU is a fundamentally flawed organisation in many ways, and I think that a significant number of decisions they continue to make, because we live in a globalised world, and because they are our nearest neighbours, and I do think that that does still matter, unlike Mr. Flook, I do think that unfortunately they will have a significant impact on this country, and what we're offering to do is basically completely give up our sovereignty, completely give up our say in how that affects us, and that's what concerns me.
Sorry, if I start now. I agree with the question entirely. I think that nowhere else in the world do we apologise for wanting to go on ourselves. The last time I checked, Australia wasn't planning to join New Zealand. Japan wasn't planning to join China. We don't go around saying, oh, these dreadful Australo-sceptics, when are they going to stop clinging to outdated notions of sovereignty? Actually, it was the normal thing that a country wants to go on its own, govern itself, make its own laws, but crucially, do our own trade deals. And we cannot do that as members of the European Union. So when we leave the European Union, we can actually strike deals with those parts of the world that are growing. And what we have is, basically, an argument that says, Europe is it. That is our horizons. And I'm saying, no, we're a global country, a trading country, a maritime country, and we should engage with the parts of the world that are growing, not tie ourselves to the world's only declining continent, other than Antarctica.
About Mr. Jones and about the point that we've been putting our faith in, or we haven't been putting our faith in economists for the last 5 times. Why should we listen to them when they say? Surely then we should address Rob, the most recent Brexit secretary who's just run away with the tail between his legs, saying that, directly quoted, I didn't understand the importance of Calais. Why should we then trust the next Brexit secretary that we elect in to make a better decision than he did?
Well, the trust in individual politicians is one thing, but this is about a process. And then we have to deliver in that process. Is we have to deliver in that process. The point is about this debate is, do we believe that Britain should be an independent, self-governing nation that is global, or do we think that Britain should be a European country that's tied to the European Commission? And what I'm arguing is we should be a global, independent nation, strike trade deals that makes its own laws and controls its own borders. Perhaps we'll come on to that later. So who we have delivering it is Brexit Secretary, that's one thing, but actually belief in the process and the deal that we've got is something that we can get behind and strike a new chapter in this country's history.
In response to what you're saying, Dan, I think we've just kind of heard an encapsulation there of everything that we're hearing constantly from government ministers, which is not a single fact, a lot of really kind of vague rhetoric and showy speech about kind of, you know, good old Blighty socking it to Europe and striding out bravely on our own, which ignores completely the realities of the modern world. It's kind of paraphrasing again the idea that came through in the referendum. One of the moments that made me laugh at the time, makes me cry now, is Michael Gove saying, I think everyone's tired of experts. Experts are exactly that. They're people who are most qualified to comment on what is likely to happen in their field. And the entirety of the Brexit kind of argument, Mr. Flook's argument, basically lies in the fact that those experts are wrong. Fingers crossed.
You talk about modernity.
Are we doing it back and
Well,
forth?
you talk about modernity. You talk about of nations. Do you accept or not that Europe is the world's only declining continent other than Antarctica, and the future is actually these other parts of the world that are growing? And that yes, a trade bloc might have been a good idea in the 50s and 60s when we had tariffs and freight costs, but now we live in a globalised world and our opportunities lie ahead of us. I'll give you a fact, as I gave before. Okay, Europe is the same size it was now in 2006. India's doubled in size. Ethiopia's economy is doubled in size. China's economy is doubled in size. Why do you want to tie ourselves so closely to the world's only declining trade bloc?
Well, I think the clue there is in the names that you give to the countries you just referenced, India, China, etc. They're referred to as developing economies. They are still developing, therefore they are likely to see greater growth because they have kind of more potential for their growth. There's absolutely, once again, it's a gamble, it's a guess that you believe that in the future they will continue kind of expanding and growing to the point where they become a more significant and a better trade partner than the EU is for us. At the moment we are the 5th biggest economy in the world, as you have said, and I don't know what you hope to achieve in terms of bettering that by leaving the EU. You will, I'm sure, argue that in some way we can improve on that. Maybe we can. But what my argument is that it's absolutely not worth the gamble for people's lives and people's livelihoods, and that is what it will constitute, the gamble.
Okay, first of all, unfortunately, if your years are 7 to 11, you now have to go to registration.
I'd like to present to Mr. Flook. So you talk all about the economy, and I know it's the economy student, that's what everyone sort of strives for, but what about the biggest threat to our society in the current day and age, which is climate change? How do you propose we fight that when we are trying to remove ourselves from the biggest bloc politically and socially in the world? And then you suggest that we make trade deals with India, with China, and look at their record. At what cost are they developing economically? Think about their records for climate change, and also President Trump. I don't know if you want to look towards him as our future trade deal partner.
Well, see, like you, I'm concerned about climate change. And what I want to say is, can we take it as read that everybody on the leave side of the argument wants to cooperate internationally? If the EU was just about cooperation, nobody would have a problem with it. The problem I have with the EU is that it's tried to take on the attributes of statehood. And it's got a currency, it's got a parliament, it's got a central bank, that increasingly has control over our laws. I mean, there's various estimates. You could take, for example, the estimate from the House of Commons Library, where the British government estimates over 50% of the UK role derives from the European Union. I could take Vivian Redding, one of the EU commissioners, that reckons 83% of the UK role is made by the European Union. The point is on things like climate change, absolutely I agree we've got to cooperate, but I don't think we have to be part of a political union to cooperate on things like climate change. The international agreements like the Paris Peace Accords, the Paris Accords, for example, I absolutely believe in those international cooperation. So I believe in international cooperation, but I don't think we're part of a political union to do that. And as I say, we should take back control of our laws, take back control of our borders, put in place an Australian-style points-based system so we can choose the quantity and the quality of people coming to Britain, done in a fair way that's not prioritising EU nationals over non-EU nationals, and work with countries bilaterally on issues like climate change.
And the issue with that is kind of lies in exactly what you said. Striking these deals unilaterally, the point of being in a trading bloc or any large kind of political union, any large kind of bloc, is that, you know, with strength, with numbers, you have greater strength. We are a much more significant force for good. We have significantly more clout in the world, whether that be dealing with climate change and demanding that developing countries adopt and match our high standards. We have significant more clout in terms of imposing sanctions on Russia, etc., etc., etc. In every field, our association with the EU makes us more powerful in terms of negotiations than we would be standing outside.
But let's take trade negotiations, for example. So Switzerland, not an EU member, has more trade deals on its own than European Union negotiating. Iceland, which is a population smaller than Croydon, has a trade deal with China, but the European Union never managed to. So you talk about clout on the world stage, but actually the evidence shows that we're talking about bilateral deals. Those outside the European Union have done better than the EU has. So can you imagine if Switzerland negotiated more trade deals on its own than the European Union? Imagine if the fifth largest economy in the world could negotiate into an independent sovereign nation altogether.
First of all, I think I'm really convinced that you can compare the UK to Switzerland or Luxembourg if we're good for that. The points are extremely kind of different. The point you're making about the kind of EU holding us back, and the point about the fact that we're going to strike these trade deals and so on and so forth. Again, these are potential flights of fancy. Every single economic projection suggests it's going to take at least 15 years to get these trade deals in place. It took Canada 8 years. To even get a trade deal as good as the current one we have with the EU, they're projecting a 15-year minimum, which means that we have 15 years of a drop in our GDP. 15 years where we're £75 billion worse off. Those 15 years are 15 years where people can't afford to make their mortgage payments, where people can't afford to feed their families, where we don't have that money to invest in infrastructure we desperately need. So you can talk pie in the sky about future projections and how one day we might be able to try and strike all these trade deals, but that doesn't deal with the gamble of here and now. And that's what I keep coming back to. We are dealing with an enormous gamble for the next 15 years, and that for the sake of some sort of Tory party obsessive ideological split with the EU, we are gambling with people's futures and people's livelihoods, and I do not think, for a point of principle, it is worth that very, very real pay.
If I can just say very quickly,
We just need to
I'll say 20 seconds one quickly, is that the irony is You just produce lots of forecasts, which have been produced wrong again and again and again over the last 50 years. So I don't understand what you're saying.
It's guesswork.
Which is what you're producing.
Okay.
Guesswork.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Firstly, many say that the Leave vote was due to blind undercurrents of British nationalism. And secondly, would you not agree that nationalism in any form is incredibly dangerous to a globalised society? Look at Brazil's Prime Minister, look at the US-China trade war, look at Russia's annexation of Crimea. How would you respond in defence of the Leave vote for Brexit?
What I would say about is yes, I think nationalism is dangerous. And that's why the nationalism I believe in is internationalism. But actually, I don't want to be part of a closed European trade bloc. It has a common external tariff, which means that if you're a farmer in Africa, for example, you find it very difficult to export your goods into Europe because they face massive tariffs. What I want to do is not prioritise the European continent that is actually contracting, so the only declining continent in the world apart from Antarctica, but actually strike these deals with countries across the world. And so the Leave campaign actually was a very upbeat, optimistic, internationalist message, which said, look, Europe's not the be-all and end-all for us. Some people seem to have a blind adherence to Europe for reasons completely beyond them. What we want to do is look, the world is changing. We don't live in a Eurocentric world. We need to go a bit above and beyond Europe and engage with these parts of the world which are growing, not to tie ourselves to the ones which decline.
Catches questions about nationalism and the threats to our politics and the threat to our security. And security is one of the 5 things that I raised at the start of this debate, and it's one of the 4 things that you haven't addressed yet, Mr. Flook. Every time there's a question from the floor, every time we get a question from the floor, you return to this kind of vaguely jingoistic claptrap about how Britain can make it on their own and that it's better to be kind of outward looking, and you talk about how we're going to become more international from withdrawing from one of the world's biggest ever trade policy, social policy, human rights deals in the history of time. I'm interested as to when you'll address security. I'm interested as to when you'll address the issues of the Northern Ireland border. I'm interested to see when you're going to address issues with an increasingly aggressive Russia. Sorry, Cathy. I haven't heard any answers yet. I've just heard, admittedly impressive rhetoric without anything to back it up.
The trouble is, though, what I haven't heard is an explanation of why we have to be in a political union to do all of those things. Are you seriously suggesting, okay, if we were outside a political union, that we wouldn't cooperate with countries on terrorism, and there's organisations like Interpol, for example, that exist to do it on an international scale? Are you seriously suggesting that just because we are members of the European Union, that all of a sudden we'll just ignore what Vladimir Putin is doing with Crimea and with Ukraine? Are you seriously suggesting that all these big international issues would suddenly just ignore just because we weren't part of the political union? It is precisely the example of why people rejected Remain in 2016, because it is just a whole list of Project Fear, and no one believes it.
I am, yes, seriously suggesting that our ability to impose sanctions on Russia will be diminished by not being part of an enormous economic union when those sanctions are economic. I am suggesting very seriously that our capability in terms of our defence will be chronically hampered as a result of being excluded from being like Galileo. I am suggesting that having on the island will potentially lead to armed violence within the UK's borders, and I am suggesting that it might compromise the US's commitments to NATO. So yes, I am very really suggesting all those things. Yeah.
But the biggest thing to undermine NATO, the biggest undermining of our defence, is the EU's common military policy, which is basically proposing to build a European army. Surely it'd be safer not to tangle ourselves in an emerging European defence policy and an emerging European army, where our British troops would be sent into war against an expansionist European Union on the side of the expansionist European Union. What we should be doing is actually not getting entangled with the European army, which is a huge impact to our defence, but actually having our own defence policy made in this country, and that is a serious undermining of what's happening.
And the single biggest block to a European army is the fact that we are in the EU and have had a voting veto in that and have successfully done so for the last 10
Which country is the most overridden country in the Council of Ministers?
I didn't hear you.
Which country is the most overridden country in the Council of Ministers?
Overridden?
As in, which country, when it's blocking EU law, has been the most overridden in?
I imagine the UK.
It has been the UK. We haven't got any say in the European Union at all. what we need to do is get our seat back on powerful international organisations like the World Trade Organization, whose seat we relinquished when we joined the world's only climate trade bloc.
Okay, let's move on. Right.
Regarding some of the Commonwealth countries, why do you feel that someone from India, despite the fact that India is the world's second largest English-speaking country, why do you feel someone from there has to go through so much excess bureaucracy to come to this country in comparison to someone from Poland?
At the moment, we prioritise, as you point out, we prioritise EU nationals. And the reason that we do that is twofold. Number one, because we believe that being a member of the EU has all the benefits I've listed. And with all those benefits comes freedom of movement. With any future deal that we strike with any other country, as a condition of that trade agreement, they would ask for changes to our immigration policy to facilitate the movement of people between those countries. So you're kind of going back to the argument we've already referenced, that in some way kind of prioritising EU immigration is in some way racist. That has never ever been the argument of Brexiteers. They've never once said that the reason that we want to reduce immigration, the reason we want to leave the EU is because we're fed up of Polish people coming over here instead of Indian people. No one has ever argued that, and no one ever will. It is not a decision about race, it's not a decision about history, it's an economic decision, because with all that freedom of trade comes that freedom of movement, and that is inescapable.
The question's right, how can anybody believe that? And the point is that we've got ourselves into a situation where people somehow think that being a member of the European Union is somehow an internationalist thing. It's not. It's a closed regionalist thing. What we should have is a controlled immigration policy, like every other country in the world operates outside the European Union, where we decide the numbers of people that come and the type of people that come. And it cannot be fair, it cannot be fair that somebody from Poland, as you point out, who has no connection to this country whatsoever, has the complete unconditional right to come to this country if he or she chooses. Yet somebody from India or Pakistan, who we have historical connections with, who speak English, who we share similar common law, much higher level of declaration to get here. We want a fair, ethical immigration policy which says, it doesn't matter where you come from, everybody has the opportunity to come to this country if they want to and if they will benefit this country. That is what's right, not, as you quite correctly point out, an unfair advantage of EU nationals over non-EU.
You said it's conditionless, and just once again, I'll pull you up to the point of fact. It does actually rely on conditions. 1994 Immigration Act, ECJ ruling, we have provision to return any immigrants who so wish to do so after 3 months if they don't meet a set of criteria. The problem is not having the criteria, the problem is not implementing those criteria. I don't know why we're not.
But that's not the question. The question is about movement of people, and the point is we have no control as EU members over who comes to this country from the EU, whereas from non-EU countries they have to go through a much higher level of declaration, and that is unfair.
You
and
keep
it is
saying
a
we have
racist
no
policy.
control over it, and I keep going back and pointing out the two measures which mean we
How many people have been prosecuted under that law? How many people have been sent back under that law?
I'll Google it afterwards.
Let's take another question.
So in the UK, we're not used to it. So in Brussels,
Let's take another question. Yes.
So this question is to Mr. Flook, and it's more of a hindsight question.
Okay.
So when Brexit is going to be put into place, who will be choosing who we trade with, or the global actions we take? Would it be Theresa May? Would it be House of Commons? Would it be House of Lords? Would it give people exceptional powers over the others? And also, in the news lately, we've been seeing how people are opposing Theresa May because she's Theresa May. So don't you think it would be like Weimar Germany, how we'll just, when it comes to Brexit, we'll just be wasting time, we'll be saying no to everything, then nothing will be put into place, and then it will just become all futile?
Well, it's a good question, and the point is, and it goes back to the point, we fought a civil war in this country to establish the principle that those that make laws on our behalf, or set taxes on our behalf, are people that we or you elect when you come to voting. So the point is, we can choose, through the ballot box, every 5 years at general elections, who is setting our trade policy, who is setting our taxes, who is making laws. Whereas at the moment, the people setting trade policy are those in the European Commission who are not just unelected, but are there by virtue of just being expressly rejected by their voters in democratic elections in their own countries. I take Neil Kinnock, for example, who lost the 92 election. The whole European Commission that make the laws on our behalf is not only that we don't elect them, but they're there because they've lost elections. And when we leave the European Union, we can put in place our own trade policy made by people you have voted for at general elections, and can remove them 5 years later if you're not happy with it.
I think you've hit on the problem, Brexit. We're going to keep going round and round and round and round because, again, Mr. Flook is talking a very aspirational game. Mr. Flook is quite rightly pointing out some of the flaws with the EU, but the fact remains, and that is inescapable, is that we are a member of the EU. We have been in the EU, and we are inextricably linked to the EU. And the proof of that is in the withdrawal deal that we're trying to negotiate now. The EU have absolutely no interest in making it easy for us. The EU have absolutely no interest in us coming out of this and having our cake and eating it. Conversely, Mr. Flook and the Brexiteers believe somehow that we will be able to have our cake and eat it. And it's becoming increasingly obvious from the deal that we have tabled, and Mrs. May has tabled, and from what the EU's response to that has been, as in, this is the deal on the table, it is this or nothing, that it is in essence impossible to extricate ourselves from this and achieve the things that Mr. Flook wants to achieve. I think we're committed to this path now, but I think we are going to suffer as a country because to sever all these bonds is, as you say, borderline impossible to do so in a way that doesn't hurt us.
There's been a lot of talk about this decision that the people took to leave the EU, but given that it's almost undeniable that most of the stuff that was said during the campaign was sort of dithering, sort of floaty sort of statements, Project Fear from the Remain side and the Leave side promising very fanciful things. It was essentially just a load of made-up stuff from the bloated egos of career politicians who were doing it for their self-interest. I mean, Boris Johnson only started supporting Leave because he saw an opportunity to enhance his career. Don't forget that he wrote 2 articles for either the Telegraph or the Guardian at the same time, one suggesting we should stay in the EU and one suggesting that we leave the EU. The type of politicians that were in this campaign didn't have any principles, they just wanted to enhance their own career. And can we genuinely say that the vote that was taken was legitimate?
Yes. Because 17.5 million people voted.
No, but they voted.
They cancelled every election. The whole history of
million a week for the NHS. Do you think that's
right?
right?
Well, let me take that point. Let me take that point about the 200 million a week. Let me take that point. So,
I didn't say there was.
okay, let me take that point. So, according to the IFS, all those cuts in the 2010-2015 Parliament that everyone got exercised about equated to £39 billion. Our total contributions to the European Union in that same time, in 2010-2015, the gross contributions was £88 billion, and the net contributions was £35 billion. So even if you insist on taking the net figure, that one single cut in public spending would have been enough to cut out the entire austerity programme in that 2010-2015 Parliament. And on that point on the NHS, if we start paying a net contribution to the EU of £10 billion a year, that means we take control back of that money to spend on frontline public services, like the NHS, like education. But it goes back to the question previously, it's the job of us, who elect a government, to actually implement those priorities. And that's the point that's being made.
I'll actually answer your question in a second, Gene, but just a little bit of rebuttal. You keep talking about us having more money when we leave the EU to spend on austerity and things. Yes. Refer back to David Davis's Treasury report, the guy who's in charge of Brexit, the guy who has a vested interest in massaging the figures and presenting them in the most kind of appealing way as possible. His own report says that we will be, after all the kind of money savings and all that sort of stuff, offset against the money lost because kind of trade's going to be more difficult and that sort of stuff. He says that we will be £27 billion annually worse off. So I don't understand where you're getting this kind of saving figure from. Now, in terms of Jean's question, I think we're talking about the validity of the referendum that is fought almost entirely on kind of populist lies, and in some cases, in terms of the poster commissioned by Nigel Farage and the UKIP party, probably what equates to the lowest kind of dog whistle style politics, appealing to people's base racist instincts. Yeah, I think that generally politicians conducting themselves in a pretty shameful way during that campaign, and I think that people were sold a fantasy, a kind of Narnia-esque land of unicorns, which was never ever possible to deliver. And pretty much the day after the referendum, Johnson and Gove admitted it was impossible to deliver. So we go back to the whole process. Was it responsible from Cameron from the outset to abrogate his responsibility as a representatively democratically elected leader? No, it was reprehensible. Was it then acceptable for countless numbers of Tory politicians to basically gamble their own political careers against the welfare and prosperity of the most vulnerable in our society? No, it wasn't. But sadly, has that exercise taken place? Is it flawed? If you were to rerun every election where people have been lied to, as Mr. Flook said, you would rerun every single election we're going to have. But I do think it was shameful. People should be ashamed.
Those same forecasts indicated that there'd be 700,000 job losses just in the vote to leave the European Union. Has that happened? No, it hasn't. Of course it hasn't. You've got record employees. So I keep going back to this point. You keep referring to forecasts.
But you just
talk about this Narnia, but it's not even a Narnia one. It's even worse than that. It has no relevance to reality whatsoever.
You might be right, but I might look back in 15 years and I might say, fantastic, we are now the world's 4th biggest economy. Huzzah, well done. And I might say that now, you know, I can really set my own fishing policy, which is a complete load of knowledge. In sectors and absolute nonsense, because we already have the power to control the quota system. We just do not. We refuse to set our quotas. We have the power to set our own quotas, and we don't fish. The fish don't just live in territorial waters. The fish, by their very nature, swim.
Iceland, for example, is not an EU member. Their fishing business is thriving because they have about 100 nautical miles of water around their island that they can fish from. Our fishermen, by the other hand, have been hamstrung by EU quotas, which has meant that British fishing has been completely decimated by membership of the European Union because we can only catch a small proportion of the fish that swim in our waters. We have surrendered 200 nautical miles of water to be part of the world's only declining continent, except from Antarctica.
We are just mad. We are first of all, this is largely irrelevant in terms of the economy because UK fishing makes up 0.5% of the national economy. So it's a side issue. It's important for fishermen. It's important for their livelihoods. We have surrendered some of our rights to fish in our territorial waters. We've offset that by fishing in other sovereign nations' maritime waters. The quota system is within our control. It's the way that we distribute the quotas around. Small fishermen are suffering because we disproportionately prioritise the massive fishing trawlers. So there's 3 companies who pretty much control all of the fishing quotas in our seas. If we kind of redistributed that across the small fishermen, in actual fact people wouldn't be suffering nearly to the extent which you claim they did because of membership. It's not about the EU, it's about the quotas that the quotas should use.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take one final question and we'll move to strictly 2 minutes.
Yes, Jane.
So, you see the result of the Brexit thing. Do you think that, because Scotland voted to leave the EU, what's your opinion of that? Should they leave United Kingdom and then stay in the EU, or should...
No, they voted to remain in the United Kingdom in 2014. That was a referendum. I respect that result. I think we respect this result.
I think that it moves. It makes it increasingly likely a second Scottish independence referendum. I think it's increasingly likely that they will win that referendum. And I think that along with the hard border in the Northern Ireland, on the island of Ireland between Northern Ireland and Ireland, I think it heralds the inevitable break of the UK as a result of the decisions called referendum.
Okay, thanks to you. A very unusually brief response to that. I'll take another question from Adam.
Yes, you say this is for Mr. Flook. Your arguments, this is mainly for you. Your arguments have all kind of been economic-based arguments without kind of, you haven't mentioned anything about the social benefits of the EU. But if you're, as a teacher of economics, how can you ignore all of the economic forecasts that have been presented by kind of if your argument's about economics and the economic forecasts are that it's going to be bad, how can you justify them?
Good question. Very easy. I went to the doctor 10 times, and on all 10 times that doctor had been incorrect. Would you listen to that doctor on the 11th occasion? Every single big economic forecast that has been made has not just been wrong, It has been so wrong to be embarrassing. And the entire argument we've heard today has relied on economic forecasts, which have all been wrong, including one after referendum that said 700,000 job losses would go. But there's one factor I'd like to talk about which isn't a forecast, and it's this. That being an independent EU nation means we can strike our own trade deals, means we can control our own borders, which means we don't send £10 billion a year net as an EU contribution every single year, and it means we can choose what happens in our country, and that is indisputable.
Strictly 2-minute time limited statements. So Mr. Jones opened up last time. So to give Mr. Flook the last word, so
Okay, so in his opening statement, Mr. Flook kind of made 5 kind of big points. First of all, he says that we're going to save all this money and we can reinvest that and we can wipe off the deficit. As an economist, you understand that money saved doesn't equate to money lost. Okay, we may save this money, but we are projected to lose a significant sum more than that. And I keep going back to this figure, and maybe it's not going to be 100% accurate, but £27 billion annually. That is, as I've already said, an enormous gamble to take on a potential fantasy future. Because even if, I can't possibly judge whether every single economic forecast that has been made will be wrong. I'll leave that for you to fight out about. But what I can say is that if I kept going back to an expert and the 11th time he was right, it wouldn't actually change what happened. I would still die if the doctor was right the final time. So if this gamble doesn't pay off, this gamble that you're prepared to take, and it is a gamble, then working people are going to suffer. And they're going to suffer for this kind of vague kind of sovereignty principle. That's the first point. We're not going to make this financial saving, I don't believe. And the second one is that you talk about the fact that yes, we're going to have trade deals. We all accept that we've got to have those trade deals. You believe we're going to be better off striking those trade deals with developing nations as opposed to an existing economic powerhouse that has made us the 5th biggest economy in the world. As I pointed out, they are developing nations for a reason. They have a significant amount of growth. It doesn't mean that growth is going to continue exponentially for forever and ever and ever. As Ms. Lumbo has pointed out, that striking trade deals with those developing nations comes with an enormous set of ethical and environmental issues which I personally don't feel particularly comfortable with. But I suppose the biggest point you made, and the point that you keep kind of coming back to, is that experts are wrong. Your own experts are wrong. You say the Treasury is wrong, you say the Bank of England is wrong, you say that your own experts you have employed to check what is going to happen, everyone is wrong. And, hey, I say, that might be the case. But when I think about going back to that figure, so one of the most conservative estimates, £400 a month worse off every single family in Britain. And I can't keep going back to thinking that this is just a classic bit of kind of Tory mentality, Tory thinking. Because it completely seems to ignore the £400 and all the people who are going to suffer as a result of that. It completely seems to overlook the most vulnerable in our society. And instead it seems to prioritise taking this massive gamble on a kind of vague point of principle. And you seem to prioritise that over actually the next 15 years. Whichever indicator we have suggests will be pretty painful and will be pretty painful to the most vulnerable in our society.
Right. This is our country. It is a very good country. It is a country that invented the principle of parliamentary democracy. It's a country that has been a global nation in the history of our time. It has been given away through a whole series of lies of deceit in the 1970s by people who said we were just joining the trading bloc, which has developed into a political union where we have lost control over the laws that we make, over the people that can come to our country, and over the trade deals that we sign. And it's very, very simple. When we leave the European Union, we can make laws in this country for the people that we elect. We can be an international country, not just a small European country. And we can redefine our global vocation, so that when we leave the European Union on March 29, 2019, that will be our Independence Day.
I just want to ask you guys one question. For those people that voted to remain, who have changed their mind now and say they would vote to leave instead? Who voted to leave at the beginning of the debate and would now vote for remain?